Boom. We are live, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you are all having and we're going to go over just a little bit about how to prepare oneself for tomorrow and how to enjoy the day that we have while moving along. So I'm going to dive in. I want to throw you guys the logo and intro here because that allows me to check to make sure everything's going smoothly. So we'll see you guys in just a second. Bam! So there we are. Everything's green. We are live. It's been a little while. I know I was going to try to go live more frequently, but I am taking almost about a week and a half off going to the Envision Music Festival and dancing through the jungles of Costa Rica. Dancing has quickly become one of my favorite out-of-body experiences inside of my body. But during that process, we had a lot of market sentiments that turned negative, some of which have not turned that negative in their entire lifespan. One of those was the S&P 500 seeing its biggest drop in its history, at least in a short intraday trading week. Now, that amounted to around 15% off the S&P 500 and very similar to that of the Dow as well. Now, obviously, you know, we are all big fans of Bitcoin here, so that's what we're going to dive in and look at first. We did see a negative sentiment come out. Again, obviously, the downside here is when you're dealing with a potential pandemic, the average consumer's inability to get the proper information is one of the things that leaves them scared and panicking. You know, I want to tip my hat to countries like South Korea and Singapore who have been doing a fantastic job of informing everyone about the severity and the nature of some of these diseases as they happen, because it just leads to a much more calm approach to making sure you have your act together. Obviously, heart goes out to everyone. People die from crazy crap all the time. I'm pretty sure the statistics of just driving a car is ridiculous. But new market sentiments, ones we have not built in yet, obviously have negative effects. Now, I don't normally jump to the conclusion of adding the negative downturn of Bitcoin and connecting it to something as fundamental as a change in the economics like a pandemic. I normally think news is a secondary and lagging, but this is just one of those occasions that we had talked about over the last few years in our list of black swans that could bring chaos to the financial and economic supply chain. Again, here, even with the numbers that we're seeing from COVID-19, it's not really the virus that's worrying so much as it is the inability of the healthcare infrastructure as well as the economic infrastructure to handle these changes. That seems to be the most devastating. So again, being preemptive and seeing these waves come in allows us to take action and profit off of them. The fact that the S&P 500 had climbed up to new all-time highs during this pandemic, or during the early stages of, I guess, what the CDC and who is not calling a pandemic at this particular moment, was very suspect. We saw a very quick drop back here in January 23rd, and then again this massive 15% drop here just over the weekend. This had a little bit more to do with the explosion of cases outside of China, going from South Korea, Italy, etc. So the average consumer in these big market indices, such as the European Union, the UK, having, I guess, their first whiff of the consequences of an overwhelmed healthcare system and the potential of losing some of your key players. You know, there's a lot of people in the ages of 50 to 80 who manage very important roles in our society and the way things grow. You know, a lot of my mentors, peers, and best friends are all in that age category, and they supply us with a massive amount of very valuable tactile and experiential information. So losing them would have a massive negative consequence as well on the economic system. Again, being, I guess, preemptive in the way we view data just allows us, I mean, I always have to remind myself not to get excited, because I always get excited about like new information. Like, oh, this is super cool. Like, I have to study and learn all this new stuff. But at the same point, we do have to remember that everyone's lives is, we all depend on one another to be able to survive and play this game together. If you start to remove too many of the fun people here, the earth by yourself is probably not a whole lot of fun, right? So we are very dependent on and interdependent on our community to make this system work. So these big drops could continue further. Again, it is very heavily reliant upon what we see come out over the next few months in the way that countries deal with these. Again, hats off to countries like South Korea and Singapore who've done such an amazing job, really, I think, making sure that the way they handle this is done in an information-based way instead of a fear-based way. I saw a video of Donald Trump, and I hate to rant, so I apologize for this, guys, it's been a while, but I saw a video of Donald Trump basically wave his hands like this, and so like this, poof, pat, it will just go away. And this to me shows a very I don't even know how to explain that without sounding totally rude. But the inability for some of these people that you would, people are looking for somewhere to trust. They want to find information that's valuable and reliable. And when you have these talking heads who have absolutely no idea what they're talking about and wave their hands like they're a magician in the sky saying that these things will just disappear, are obviously ignoring facts. And I think that scares people more than just providing them the valuable information of like, okay, well, this is what we're going to see, this is what we can expect, and more importantly, we need to keep this game running because this is basically a balance between how many people's lives are going to be lost versus keeping the economy running versus keeping everyone calm. And it's a balance. These types of balancing acts are very difficult because as soon as you lean from one side more to the other, you're going to upset one part of the society. And again, that's why I think the most important way to go here is provide this tactile and actionable data. So I've started preparing a little bit of extra food, a little bit of extra things I like to have on the side because the supply chain could be weakened here. And again, it's better to be ahead of the curve and prepared rather than out looking and scared. I was going to make a trade because I felt like there was a big shortcoming to see that drop in the S&P 500 while I was dancing. I looked at myself like, well, there was one of those like once in a year trades. I mean, I'm very grateful. I was out dancing. I wouldn't trade it for anything. It was I had such a brilliant, shining time in my life. These last few days has been absolutely amazing. So it's not all about money. But when you see moves like this, it's not necessarily the best suggestion to think that they are over so quickly either. So what I want to take a look at here is the potential downside for Bitcoin. So now that I'm kind of done my rant, we can get into a bit more of the technicals of this. And we had looked at this before, and again, the only reason I like to look at downsides for Bitcoin here specifically is just to understand that there are always other opportunities for choice, right? So just because one thing happened does not mean that this is going to be the inevitable next turn result. So back here, around $6,000 on October 20th, 2018, our initial sentiments of Bitcoin may be going down to the $1,500 range was based off an actual B wave that would take us to around $6,000 and then come back down again to the $1,500 area. Now, with how excited Bitcoin has been throughout its entire lifespan, this new revolutionary technology shifting the borders and boundaries of finance as we know it, I've often suspected that the volatility that's hidden within those emotions of the people that have been paying attention to that game for a long time are often more heightened than those that are found in the traditional markets. So it's not too far off of base for me to assume that at least on a negative downside, you could see a B wave that would jump up to 13,000 and then come back down again lower. Now, there are a few ways to look at this that are all bullish, obviously, but when you have a black swan, like a potential pandemic in the sky, one of the questions that obviously comes to mind is, well, what good is money if you can no longer find a way to acquire the goods and services from the countries that would ship them that you would normally want, right? For instance, you can take air travel as an example, which has dropped almost 30% in the last few weeks to specific countries. These are big hits for these airliners, right? The financial stress that this leaves on those companies, the people that work there, that have families that are reliant upon their checks that they need to get from their work there to be able to survive on a day-to-day basis, is actually quite important to the people that need those checks, right? They're not just their lives, but their family lives are dependent upon their preparedness to provide something to eat on a daily basis. So we do always have to remember that, in these downturn events, just like in 2008, there are people's lives at stake here and their livelihoods, I think, which is obviously very important to those that are bringing the table or food to the table for their children, etc. So in the event of a downturn, Bitcoin might not bode so well. We could see a return to a much lower price point here. Now, I got really excited. I know you all watched me get really excited about the breakout of this bull flag because it was something we had been watching for quite some time. Now, I had said, again, the only thing that could turn this around is some type of black swan, and boom, just like that, a black swan came flying out of nowhere and landed on right beside all of us in a very noticeable fashion. So I think right now the best thing one can do is hedge all your bets. The other day, when I wanted to take a short out against the system, I didn't, only because I'm taking time off by going and playing with life. Generally, almost always you're going to want to hedge your assets by having some type of leveraged bet. Back when I first started trading, a lot of it was options and calls, like out of the money calls on the stock market crashing as basically a hedge against the rest of my portfolio, knowing that even though we're in a bull market sentiment, that leveraged bet on the downside would make up for a lot of the losses that I might incur in the event that something else happened. And now with Bitcoin, to hedge our bets here, the best thing we can do is essentially hedge through leverage or margin trading with a small amount based off something relevant to your trading or investment account. And again, this is different for everybody. It can vary wildly depending on how much you have in traditional markets versus property that you own, whether it's physical assets like gold or silver versus stock in Tesla, etc. How do you hedge against a potential market downturn? Generally, the VIX is a really great way to go. So I know I'm going to jump around here for a little bit to try to explain this. I'm sure some of you already know the VIX, but it's the volatility exchange against the S&P 500. And as you can see, it's had a massive spike here due to that recent fall. So often you can buy these out of the basically leveraged bets and come out swinging in terms of a small amount on them. And what you do is you hedge based off your what you would call your risk assessment ratio, like how much money do you have in an individual asset versus that asset's ability to fall, right? So the VIX acts as a bit more of a stable version of a way to hedge against the bet of the fall of the S&P 500. And as you see on the, right here, the S&P 500 dropped 15%, but the volatility index gave you a gain of over 240% in less than 9 days. Excuse me, I definitely have a rhinovirus. There's so much mucus in my throat lately. The interesting part here is that being able to really self-manage a portfolio, I think, is one of the not just your portfolio, but how do you self-manage your life and risk in general? When you ask yourself, okay, well, these are the things that I'm interested in, this is what I'm heavily invested in, is there anything I can do to hedge that bet so that if that does not go the way that I expected, I'm still going to do very well? And, even though I'm not a big fan of some of the other work that goes on in this space because there's so much conspiracy theory and nonsense that gets bled out, I guess, you really want to ask yourself, what can I do to always be thriving and prospering, even if it's in an economic downturn or a potential pandemic? And I think the best way to do that is to be extremely informed and well prepared for every scenario. So not just in the event of a pandemic, we might need N95 masks or bleach or whatever, prepared like for the collapse of a supply chain potentially. How do I prepare for a potential black swan in the markets? And the VIX was a great way to do that. Again, I did not take a short this week, but over the next few days, if things do not bode better for the numbers that we're seeing come out of some of these first world countries, remembering again, Korea has an amazing infrastructure set up for hospitals and Medicare. If they start to take the brunt and force of this, the rest of the economy is going to turn down, and we may see a full-on recession, which we still have not yet seen coming from the S&P 500. Bitcoin, I do believe, would follow that. I have no reason to believe that Bitcoin would act as a hedge against the collapse of the stock market. I never thought it was. I always thought it was a hedge against the collapse of the US dollar. The DXY somehow it only took a very slight hit. It did take a hit right back down to our previous support lines, but of only 2%. The US dollar is still holding very strong, and it's not until that dollar would break that I think Bitcoin would really show its true face and worth of anywhere between the hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars per Bitcoin, based off a unit of monetary value that I can transfer across the world without the need or necessitation of a third-party trust through bank or government. That has still yet to be recognized how valuable that sentiment is, and I do believe we won't see that during the collapse of a stock market. Again, remembering the market itself is actually full of valuable goods and services that people provide on a day-to-day basis. If you want to be taking flights or traveling or buying yourself new instruments, those are all products and services that are provided through a supply chain. If you can no longer get those, the value of money itself actually starts to decrease. Now, we saw Donald Trump again just come out and say some of the most ridiculous shit I have ever motherfucking heard, ladies and gentlemen. But I think it just goes to show he's been asking for the Fed to push in negative interest rates, I've been told. And this type of talk is really at the behest of the reason why someone would want to own something like Bitcoin as an asset in their general portfolio to begin with. That will, in the long term, I think, bode very positive for us. But again, in the short term, I think that a collapse in the regular markets would not bode well for Bitcoin. So I'm playing here very cautiously for anything that I have in this part of my portfolio, because we might be able to pick up Bitcoin here for a fraction of the cost, depending on what happens. If we do see a rebound, there are reasons to think that Bitcoin could find value here as well. What if key members of banks can no longer make it to work? For instance, now Bitcoin can become an intermediary of exchange without the need for the banks or the people at the banks to be working. Again, what you do need, if they do not show up for work, your wire transfers might not make it. Companies like PayPal, Square, all rely on that underlying infrastructure of the banking system itself. So again, a lot of the times what we're trying to do here is just pose questions to understand what the effects of those questions might be, even if they are not the direct or, I guess, exact outcome. It's just we try to look and ask all of these questions so that we can be prepared and understand how to hedge that risk assessment in these rather volatile times. So I'm actually going to be looking at shorts here. If you're in the private bear den, we thought going short to 8,600 was a great idea, but I said I'm going out dancing, so fuck it. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, fuck it. Go dancing instead. But re-entering into a short right now is not something I'm going to do. We are still in the intermediary stages. We're still in the early stages of trying to understand how this will exactly play out. And I think just jumping into a negative sentiment obviously isn't the best, but to play cautiously here and to be basically Hawkeye everything. So for all the group of the private bear family, I want to thank all you guys for being so supportive, sharing all your information, all your charts and thoughts. What we try to do is empower everyone with the tools and skill sets that they need to manage their own portfolio in any event. Whether things are going up or things are going down, there is always a way to prosper from and profit from these changes. I've always really enjoyed, I guess, the subtlety in the relationships of the word P-R-O-I or P-R-O-F-I-D. I can't even spell, that's how sick I am. Or P-R-O-P-H-E-T. For whatever reason, these words, I think synonyms, is that what that is? I forget the English word, but I think it's a synonym, sound alike but spelt differently. There is something about being able to see what's coming in the future and being able to profit from it as well. So we're keeping a really close eye on it here. If we may even see a big head and shoulders come out. Again, I do not believe a pandemic or a kink in the supply chain would bode well for Bitcoin. How low it goes, again, really depends on the drastic or draconian measures that might be taken from the governments. We've already seen, again, it's really crazy the difference in the way each of these bodies reacts, from as in comparison with Singapore and Korea versus China, who's just basically draconianly locked down people and welded them in their houses. Every government and country reacts drastically different to these dramatic circumstances, and I think that in the long term will really decide the direction that it takes. Is what happens when everyone starts to kind of lock in and go into a bit more of a self-quarantine state, if that were to be the case. Switzerland has banned gatherings over 1,000 people. Singapore has done the same. And these are harsh measures in the short term, but they are supposed to help alleviate the pain in the long term. Again, understanding these mathematics in the way the virus could spread is also how we're looking at its effects on the market. And that's what we want to do here, is just make sure that you guys are all well prepared for whatever happens to be able to profit from that, so that you can pay for the medical bills that you might need or whatever might come up. So I'm going to leave it short a little bit for tonight. I'm going to answer a few of your guys' questions. I know I didn't get too much into the sentiments. Mostly here, I would go into technical analysis, but we have a fundamental black swan sitting by the ocean side right now as she's like cleaning her underwings. So it's not the best time to be looking at a technical situation. We could see a fundamental change in the economy right now, and that is where I believe would bode negative for Bitcoin. Otherwise, I was bullish. I was actually bullish all the way back, at least re-entering around 7,700. It's going to end up taking like close back to the bottom of that trade now. So entering a potential short here is going to be based off that fundamental analysis of how the rest of these economies and countries accept the facts that come to their doorstep on a day-to-day basis. Anyways, I'm leaving it at that. I'm going to give you guys my silly face here, answer a few of your questions. Again, I want to thank you guys. Remember to give us those thumbs up if you like these videos, you enjoy listening to me rant about whatever happens to come to mind at that particular time. I'm going to do my best to answer whatever questions you guys might have. I'm also going to pause so I don't have to listen to myself in the background. Not impressed with Trump. Yeah, that was some pretty astounding stuff I saw from Trump as well. It just such a weird thing to see when someone goes and shakes their hands like this and says, and it will be gone. Like it's a motherfucking magician up on stage or some shit. Like it just does not make any sense to me. Daydreamer saying it costs over $3,000 to get a corona test done in the United States. I believe that is why they said they are not trying to test everybody right now, which again does not make any sense. Just letting things run rampant is where you would run into problems with the healthcare system. So just openly and blatantly admitting, saying, oh, let it run free is obviously a wrong step. It's not the virus here we're worried so much as it is about the fragility of the economic and the healthcare system as a whole. Coronavirus is a bioweapon. So COVID-19 has some characteristics to it that are definitely sitting in the uncertain area, although in the terms of the bioweapon, I don't necessarily think it makes a difference. The world itself, through the zoonotic nature of viruses and the billions of them that reign. See, one of the things I love about this is it always gives me a chance to study and learn more about stuff that I just had no idea about. I was never interested in virology or pathology or epidemiology before, but now is a great time to learn more. So whether it's a bioweapon or not, I think is unimportant. The world apparently rains billions of viruses down on the planet on a daily basis. The RNA of those viruses have just not yet figured out a way to interact with our particular species. Because as far as we know, a bunch of them come from fucking space. We're finding asteroids all the time that have proteins. We're like, yep, that's not from here. That's definitely came from somewhere else. So I think it's, regardless of where it came from, a bioweapon naturally created or from a... as I cough and sniffle away, right? Ridiculous. I don't think it makes a difference. I think the raw data says the same thing, that this is going to be a heavy stress on the economic supply chain. So to be aware of that and hedge your bets so that you can make this a profitable moment in your portfolio for yourself and your family. Do you believe that Bitcoin can hit an all-time high this year with the virus spreading? So, Robert, that's a great question, and I kind of went over this earlier. I think Bitcoin is going to be negatively correlated to this chain unless we see a real hit in the dollar itself. A hit in the dollar system would make Bitcoin's value spike through the roof because it would become unnecessary to move value through around the world without borders, without governments, without banks, potentially. And that could be a huge deal for us going forward. So even if Bitcoin goes down in the short term, the inevitable result here is the value proposition of this technology, I think, will come to the forefront, even if we do see a downturn based off this pandemic, maybe for the next 2 or 3 years, potentially. Again, we're right in that middle ground now where maybe we swing by and we contain it, and it's like we don't have to deal with it. Again, the downside is we have something that's very viral, which means it's very likely that a lot of people are going to get it. And the downside to that is when we see a pandemic like the flu, we're talking about a 1.28 R0, which essentially means that if I'm sick, every person I meet, 1.2 other 8 people are going to get sick, right? Whereas with the COVID-19 disease, or what they're calling SARS-CoV-2, its R0 number is somewhere around anywhere between 2 and 7, depending on the draconian measures that are taken to try and stop these ideas. So, we're right in that middle ground where we're not sure. Maybe we make it out and we don't see this pandemic, but again, we might be dealing with this as a society for years to come. And I agree with Cliff High here on some of this. This may actually change the general not infrastructure, but the culture's code of conduct. Like people, how you kiss cheeks twice in places like Italy. That might become just an elbow bump or a foot kick. I saw some great videos around that, or maybe the bow. The Asian bowing to one another seems to be like a pretty smart play now. and one way to avoid potential pandemics. This stuff, I think, will become commonplace. It has not yet, but if we continue down this path, this will change the fabric of the way our culture associates with each other. And in a lot of ways, you could imagine this will bring us closer. If we going through these types of situations always builds stronger community. So there's always upsides to this. I know it's very easy to assume that it's just going to be all bad, but we will make it through this as a species. It will be bumpy, very, very bumpy. But what's on the other side of that is generally a reward, just like going to the gym or doing your meditations. Yeah, if meditation were easy and sitting for an hour with your motherfucking eyes closed were just like super simple, everybody would do it because the results are fantastic. But it does take that hard work and kind of disciplined movement to make it through these changes and come out the other side swinging. Anyways, I'll leave with that. Remember to give us those thumbs up one last time, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for sharing your time with us. I'm going to be back tomorrow with a fun little prepping video because I've been gathering seeds and dirt for the greenhouse. And I'm just going to keep riffing and ranting, and I'm being so grateful for all of your guys' support. Shout out to all the Bear family. If you guys want to join our private newsletter, you can. But really, it's only for the bold and the courageous. We only try to empower people to make their own decisions, to come up with your own conclusions. Never are we giving anyone, make this trade at this point. It's better to have the skills that you need to be able to enter and exit based off your own understanding of how these markets work. And that's a significantly more valuable skill and tool set to have in the long term. So this is T with the Arcane Bear. Thank you all so much. I love you. Have a great evening, ladies and gentlemen. We'll see you guys again on the other side.